Let's look at the data transmission now. Data transmission can happen in two ways. The first one is streaming, and the second one, which is the opposite of streaming, is batch. Streaming is when you are transmitting the data from the place of generation to the place of either processing or storage in near real time. That's what is called a stream of data. And batch is wherein you accumulate the data or aggregate it, or you sort of cache it, or just keep the data at the point wherein the data is generated, and then transmit it wherein the data is batched together, and then it is sent for certain processing or storage. A typical example would be if you look at the search system. So whenever a user interacts with the results, for example, they click on add to cart, or they click on a particular search result, or even the fact that they scroll through the page, those kind of events are sent in near real-time manner via one of the tools that we discussed to the backend server, and that is a very good example of a streaming event. But then batch events could be, for example, when a bank at the end of the day decides to accumulate all the transactions that has happened through various channels and put that into let's say one Excel sheet, and then use that sheet for performing any kind of transactions or any kind of processing. That is an example of a batch data. Now, when is a streaming data used and when is a batch data used? That really depends on the particular use case. In most of the applications that we interact with, there is a good mix of streaming and batch processing that happens. We will look at the use cases and when to use when as we go along. Moving on to streaming now. So when we talk about streaming, there are really a few concepts that we need to get accustomed to. The first concept is that of a queue. Now, queue is a very simple data structure wherein you put a message in one end and then you retrieve message from the other end. Now, queues can really be of two types. There could be a first in first out queue, which is called a FIFO queue as well. And then there is a last in first out queue, which is called a LIFO queue. So the nature of these queues, and again, there are different scenarios wherein FIFO is preferred, and then there are certain scenarios wherein LIFO is preferred. But fundamentally that's what a queue does. Now, what goes inside the queue is called a message, and this message could really be anything that you want to put it into the queue, right? So now queues as a data structure are simple and very efficient, and that's why they are pretty much used everywhere to perform streaming actions. Now, there are certain kinds of frameworks and softwares that are available that act as message brokers. So these message brokers are responsible for creating different implementations of queues and messages, and they help the producer and consumer subscribe to certain messages and be able to process on top of it. For example, RabbitMQ, Kafka, ZeroMQ are three very popular message brokers that are available, and these are some of the softwares that you can simply download and run on your laptop or desktop. There's an open source version and a commercial version available, both. Okay, so there are fundamental differences about how RabbitMQ works, how Kafka works, and in what scenarios ZeroMQ works. But one thing that they all align is that they enable a set of processes called producers to produce these messages, and they also enable a certain set of processes called consumers to consume these messages. Now this happens, now the When a producer produces these messages, that is also called publishing in certain contexts. And when a consumer receives those messages, that is also called subscribe, because the consumer effectively subscribes to a certain topic or a certain queue that is exposed by these brokers, and any message that is sent on those particular topics is received by the consumers, and they operate on top of it. There are various ways of sending these messages. For example, RabbitMQ has a different notion of sending messages, and Kafka has different, and we will go into those details as well. There are different protocols which are used with these queues. So AMQP is a protocol that RabbitMQ uses, and MQTT is another very lightweight protocol that was primarily designed with the whole industrial IoT or IoT infrastructure in general, because MQTT is very lightweight, uses very less energy, and is able to transmit data. Then there are definitely cloud queues. So if you are using one of the cloud service providers like AWS, Azure, GCP, they all have their implementation of a certain queue wherein a message can be sent, and there could be consumers that are being able to consume from these messages. The high level concepts of queues in cloud queues is similar to what one or more of these open source brokers provide, and we'll look through them. The other kind of queue is called WebSockets, and these WebSockets are typically established between a web server and a client that is interacting with that web server. And over these WebSockets, it is possible for the client to establish a connection with the server and receive a continuous stream of data or send a continuous stream of data. So for example, when you are watching this particular video, in all likelihood, the web page on which you are watching this has created a WebSocket connection, and the data is being streamed continuously from the server to your desktop or mobile or whatever your client is. WebSockets are very efficient and are primarily used in internet scenarios, in establishing a streaming data between the web server and the client, because the other because the other brokers or cloud queues cannot directly work with a web browser, and that's where WebSockets come into picture. The other way of providing streaming data is through notifications, although it's not really a way of streaming data in the conventional sense that we understand data streaming, but it still is a way to send information from a server to a particular client in a unidirectional manner. So all the notifications that you get on your mobile phone or any other browsers are an example of the notifications, and they also fall under the category of streaming data transmission.